having decimal in the divisor, which we haven't had formally this year yet. So let's experiment with division. Who can tell me what 12 divided by 3 would be? 12 divided by 3. Yes, ma'am? 4. Who can tell me what 120 divided by 30 would be?
4.
4. What is 12,000 divided by 3,000?
4.
4. Which, if you think about the division written as a fraction, makes sense. 12 over 3 is 4, 120 over 30 is 4, because we essentially multiply the numerator and denominator by an equivalent power of 10. But it would work no matter what. I could double each of these and make 24 divided by 6 equals 4. So if you multiply the dividend and the divisor by the same number, it does not change the quotient. So therefore, if we're dividing by a decimal, we can swoop that decimal point out of the divisor. So our steps to divide by a decimal will be to move the decimal point in the divisor enough times to the right to make the divisor a whole number, and move the decimal point in the dividend the same amount of times, and again to the right, to make sure you get the same quotient as the original problem. I'm just going to divide as usual. Now you have a whole number divisor. If there is a decimal point in the dividend, we put the decimal point in the quotient directly above the decimal point in the dividend. So that's something we've done before, but it's a step that sometimes people forget. So if we had 15 divided by 2.5, if it's something that we could do with mental math in this case, we can instead divide 150 by 25. So how many quarters are 150 cents, or $1.50? 6. So it makes it a little bit easier to do mental math in that particular case. You don't need to set up long division. Now if you do need to set up long division, I personally think you're going to help yourself out by setting up the long division first, because then you won't hopefully overshoot. So if I have 8.17 divided into, move it over just a little bit because I can't even write the problem. Never mind the answer. 4,575.2. The reason I set it up is because I want to know that in here is the decimal I need to get rid of. That means over here, to make an equivalent division problem, I have to go swoop, swoop. And I know that this is equivalent to doing 817 divided into, that's a big number, 457,520, of course. Not something you're probably going to do with mental math. So it's a lot of guess and check. So how many times does 817 go into 4? Yes, ma'am. It doesn't. How many times does 817 go into 45? Yes, ma'am. It doesn't. How many times does 817 go into 457? Seeing a trend here. It doesn't, sir. How many times does 817 rather go into 4,575? Approximately, you're guessing, hoping you don't go over. But you might, the sister might yell this, and that might be okay. What do you think back there?
5 times.
5 times. I would guess 5 as well, because you can look at this 8 here and the 45 there to get an estimate. So we think maybe 5 times. 817 times 5. When it gets complicated like that, when I'm really not very confident that it does go in for sure without going over, I usually do it off to the side, partly because then I also have that value for later on. So go ahead and do that multiplication. About 4,085. What'd you guys get?
4,085.
So we subtract 4,085. So far we haven't gone over. Sister Nafila. And looking at it, it looks like it's going to be less than 800. So hopefully we got a good guess there. And Sister Nafila. So 0, 4, that's a 1, that's a 9. 4 minus 0 is 4. I subtracted, I got 490. Is that what you guys got?
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, sister says, is 490 less than 817? Yes, it is. So that means brother can bring down. Do not do the divide step until you've done the bring down step. So now we've done the bring down step, now we can repeat the process. So how many times do we think 817 goes into 4,902 without going over? And again, it's a bit of a guess and check, but now we have a little bit more knowledge to go on. We know what 817 times 5 is. What do you think? 6. So we think we're going to be able to get another whole one out of there. So 817 times 6. We're going to do your multiplication. What'd you get for the product?
4,902.
4,902. Technically no and there, but you know, we say it. What happens? So we subtract, we get 0. Sister's okay with that. But brother still has another number to bring down. So that means we do have to go through the division steps again. How many times does 817 go into 0? We do have to ask that question because we did have something else to bring down. 0. So we do have to put that 0 up there. And you could show the multiplication step and the subtraction step and all that. Or you can just go, yay, nothing else to bring down after that. Smiley face. Okay. So that's how I would do it if I had 2 decimal places in my divisor. I'd swoop them away, swoop, and then tack on a 0 for the second swoop. So I might need those placekeeper zeros sometimes. And this next one, if I was told to rewrite this problem to get rid of the decimal in the divisor, I might swoop 3 times. But I don't need to, and that's going to make it more complicated. So instead, if I set up my long division, it sort of encloses or restricts how many swoops I can do on that divisor. Because that's all I need is to swoop the one time to get rid of the decimal in the divisor. Because that was the first step. Move the decimal point in the divisor enough times. So I only need to swoop 1 time to make it a 64. That means over here I swoop 1 time and I make it 589.44. So that's a little trick, is to put it into your long division so that you don't overshoot. Because otherwise you're going to be doing 6,400 into 58,944, which is a bit more complicated to deal with. I personally oftentimes forget about my decimal in my answer, so I put it in right away. You don't have to, as long as you remember to put your decimal in your answer. Now let's do some division. How many times does 64 go into 5? 64 go into 5 how many times? It doesn't, sir. How many times does 64 go into 58? 64 into 58, how many times? It doesn't. How many times does 64 go into 589? How many times do you think 64 goes into 589 again? 2-digit divisor, not easy to deal with, so we come up with a guess, and we hope sister doesn't yell at us, but she might. What do you got?
9.
You think maybe 9? I don't know. When you look at the front numbers 58 here, and the front number 6 there, 6 times 9 is 54. Seems like a reasonable guess, right? 64 times 9, go ahead and do your scratch work. Scratch, scratch. Didn't even have to deal with this. I got 576. Then I go ahead and do 589 minus 576, the sister subtract step, and I get 13. At this point, do not ask how many times does 64 go into 13, because we haven't done brother's bring down step. So these are some of the mistakes I'm still seeing with your long division. Not everybody's, but sometimes people are asking how many times does it go in before they bring down the next number. Now we brought down the next number. How many times do you think, without going over 64, goes into 134? An estimate. Could go too high, could go too low. We just fix it up. Yes, ma'am.
2.
2 times. Because 2 times 64 is what? You could do it out, or you could just double 64 perhaps, if you're able to keep track of the numbers. 128. And then we subtract 134 minus 128, what do we get? Yes, sir? 6. And then when we do the brother's step next, what do we get?
2. Could it go on a limb and say 64?
That's where we get the 64. All right, how many times do you think 64 goes into 64 without going over? Gotta be careful, you don't want to go over, sister will yell at you and make you go back. It goes in 1 time. Because 1 times 64 is 64. And when you subtract, you get
0.
a smiley face. All right, we got one more problem. Everybody has all the steps written down for these 2 so far? I don't remember what's different about that one more problem. Let's find out. If it doesn't work out evenly, put on more zeros so you can continue to divide. That's what's different. The last 2 worked out by the time we got to that last digit. This one, not so much. That's your little heads up. That's what's different about this problem. So for this one, again, if I set up my long division first, it prohibits me from over-swooping. Because I only need to swoop each number 1 time. I don't need to get rid of the two decimal places in 4.11. I only need to get rid of the 1 decimal place in the 0.8. So, we're going to be dividing 8 into 41.1 instead of 0.8 into 4.11. And it's okay. You can do that. How many times do you think 8 goes into 4 without going over? 0 times. So then I move over and I look at the next 2 digits at one time. How many times do you think 8 goes into 41 without going over?
5.
You think 5 times. Because 5 times 8 is what? Shh. 5 times 8 is what? Yes, sir. 40. And you subtract 40 from 41, and what do you get? 41 minus 40. That's right, that's what I'm asking you. 1. Do not ask how many times did 8 go into 1. We're not at the repeating step yet. We just did sister subtract step, so brother tells us to bring down. Now that we've brought down, we have 11. How many times does 8 go into 11 without going over? How many times does 8 go into 11 without going over? Yes, sir. 1 time. Because 1 times 8 is what? 8. Now, sister tells us to subtract 11 minus 8. 11 minus 8 is what? Yes, sir? 3. 3 is less than 8. Sister doesn't have to yell at us, but brother has to bring down. We're dealing with decimals. That means we have to tack on another 0. How many times does 8 go into 30 without going over? 8 into 30 without going over? 8 into 30 without going over? Huh? 3. Because 8 times 3 is what in the back? 24. And I subtract 30 minus 24, and what do I get? 30 minus 24? 6. 6 is less than 8. Sister doesn't have to yell at us, so brother can bring down another 0. How many times does 8 go into 60 without going over? 8 into 60 without going over? 7 times. Because 7 times 8 is what? What? Yes, ma'am? 56. We subtract again. 60 minus 56 is what? Yes, sir. 4. Sister doesn't have to yell at us because 4 is less than 8. So brother can bring on another 0. The end is in sight, though, because 8 goes into 40. How many times? How many times do they go into 40? Way in the back. 5 times. Because 5 times 8 is what? What's 5 times 8? 40. And we subtract and we get what?
Smiley face!
Oh, thank goodness. That one's done, right? So for this one, we get 5.1375.